lawyer, half the week trainer and coach. And you said I could kindly also mention my book, Ebony. So there we go. Last year, The Authentic, Michelle, a copy is coming to you. I do need to post it. I wrote The Authentic Lawyer last year. Well, actually, no, it took me about 3 years to write. It came out last year. And it is part of my mission to make sure as many lawyers in the country have access to a copy.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Hannah. Reg, why don't you go next?
Sure. All right. So my name's Reg Amoah. I'm a diversity inclusion manager at Stewarts, which is a law firm in the city. I've been doing D&I since 2018, where I first started at Norton Rose Fulbright, another law firm. See a pattern there. But I didn't come into sort of D&I until 2018. Prior to that, I'd worked in for housing associations and sort of third sector organisations, but the premise of my role was around social mobility, so just trying to help people get on in life, basically. So I kind of came into the D&I world from that trajectory, trying to help people from, I guess, less privileged backgrounds get into like elite professions, and so law seemed to be a good place to be able to do that.
100%. Oh, that's quite interesting. And last but not least, Michelle.
Hi everyone, thanks Ebony, absolutely thrilled to be here this afternoon. So my name's Michelle Fox. I am Head of Talent and Diversity at a mid-sized law firm called Capsticks, and we specialise in providing legal services predominantly to the health and social care sector. And it's lovely because there's that socially purposeful element threaded throughout all of the work that we do and the clients that we have. Prior to this role, I was an L&D manager at Norton Rose Fulbright, and that's where I met Reg. We were thick as thieves at NRF.
Partners in crime, right?
Partners in prime, yeah, absolutely. Those are the good old days.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that, I was working for Stonewall, the UK's LGBT charity, where I met my lovely wife Sarah, actually, and we have just recently moved to Hebden Bridge in West Yorkshire, Happy Valley, yes. So my local office is now
me.
Yeah, closer to Ebony. My local office is now the Leeds office, and it's really lovely, I have to say. I'm really enjoying the move from London to the north. My role as Head of Talent and Diversity focuses on two remits, really. Everything to do with sort of people development, employee engagement, training, learning and development, and then everything to do with ED&I. But the thing that I get my energy from is creating kind of safe spaces for people to, evolve their thinking, realise their potential, nudge them a bit closer to sort of different, more inclusive behaviours. And that's me.
Ah, amazing. So you can see why I picked and invited and asked basically all three of these amazing panel members to join the session and talk about these kind of key issues, because they've all got a background, a passion, and an amazing personality. So without further ado, the first kind of, I guess, issue that we're going to be talking about today, or the first question, is around the main barriers. Now, we're going to be talking about these from an intersectionality perspective, which Hannah will define for us in just a moment. But in terms of accessing the legal sector and opportunities, basically, what are those main barriers and how can we tackle those is going to be the first part of the session. So Hannah, please could you give us a bit of a brief introduction or definition of what intersectionality is?
I don't know why you've picked me, Ebony. I'm sure
sorry.
Michelle Reg would be far more well equipped to answer this. So in fact, I will answer, but I would be very happy for them to pick up afterwards. And I had to ask this a while ago because I didn't know. And I thought, I am always trying to be supportive and to learn more. And so that's why, I want to know as much as I can. But from my understanding, it is where we have got different characteristics overlapping. So there is more than one. So it could be neurodiversity and race or such. So, or disability and something else. So that is certainly my limited understanding of it, Ebony. So thank you for asking me that, but at least it gave me the opportunity to put my hands up and say, I am new to that particular definition.
That's perfect. Do you know what? And the reason why I asked you, Hannah, actually, is because we spoke about this a little while back, and the way you explained it so simply was absolutely perfect. And that's because I think a lot of people overcomplicate this. Like, it is a big word, it does sound kind of fancy, but let's not actually overcomplicate. What is intersectionality? Simply, you're more than one protected characteristic, or you're more than one part of that group that can often leave you feeling, you know, sort of like where you need to find that sense of belonging. So whether that's, like you said, race or ethnicity or disability, and it's looking at barriers that kind of, you know, how some of the barriers are more prevalent, or it's harder for people who are more than one group because they've got, you know, they might be having issues with identity as well as sexuality, or issues with disability as well as then overcoming the hurdles of being black or being brown, or, you know, whatever ethnicity they may be. So simple is often sometimes the best, and that was a perfect definition. So yeah, Reg, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the main barriers that you see from this perspective in terms of accessing the legal sector?
Yeah, so I think I always talk about the cost and the value of difference, right? So in terms of people being able to access the legal profession, you've got to start from a point where we understand that there is a cost. Everyone has different characteristics, right? We've all got different characteristics, but to some characteristics there's a cost, right? So if you're let's say if you're from a working class background, the cost of that difference is that you come from an environment where there may not be many professionals, and that means that you don't have access to like information and people who would be able to point you in the right direction, or even link you into someone who could help you. Yeah, so that's a cost that you incur. If you don't have that cost, so if you're middle class, then you'd be seen to have privilege, but it just means that you don't have that cost that a working class person has, right? So that's one cost. And then, you know, you have a regional accent probably, and so those things are going to cost you as you're going through the process of trying to get into a university. That will be where you get picked up or get onto a VAC scheme, or trying to even apply for a law firm where you don't really know anyone that works there. So there's so many different barriers. But then if you, from an intersectional perspective, if you put on another layer where, say, you're black or you're Asian, you look physically different from everybody. So one of the things that you're going to get as you go on your journey is that people will be surprised to see you there. I think more so if you're black, because there's a great underrepresentation of black people in the legal profession. So you're in a situation, and you know, you get that question, oh, you know, where are you from? And sometimes people are asking that because they don't expect to see you there. So what they mean is, why are you here? Like, what's happened that brings you here? So that's another layer.
Literally.
We'll
have to host a whole other session on the where are you from question, because it goes quite deep.
And so then you've got the other element of gender. Now, gender is quite an interesting one at the entry level, because as I said when we first came on, we get quite a lot of we're doing quite well in terms of getting a lot of young women applying and coming in. So if you look at any of the stats for any of the law firms, you'll see that it's skewed in favor of women. And then, but when you go to people from a working class background, it's more heavily weighted in favor of women. So what that means is that boys from working class backgrounds, especially like black boys, are not getting in. So there, it kind of turns itself on its head, where the assumption is often that it's women that struggle to get through. But in often cases, like, I've run work experience schemes with Michelle, I've run them in different places, and you always get a lack of male representation. And there are things I can go into, but maybe I'll go into that later down the line. But so you've got to look at the different levels and see, like, why are people not coming through, or why are people not coming through the school system. So there's certain demographics that are more likely to be expelled, more likely to be maybe stopped and searched in school. You know where I'm going with this. And so because they have such a rough time in the schooling system, then they're not even going to come into the talent pool. So that's another challenge, right? So you're not going to even have the available talent there to recruit. So the question might be is, where do your interventions start? Do they start, with prime sixth formers? Do they start earlier on with insight days, or, working with schools to kind of engage sort of young people who are potentially disaffected, to kind of show them there's another route for them? So there's a whole
I think
sort of
that
heap of
would
questions for
definitely
people.
have, I was going to say, I think it would definitely have impact of, just hearing at a young age, like what routes are available to you. And also, I don't know about yourselves, but I feel some people in these kind of lower economic backgrounds, and I come from a town like this myself, Oldham, and a lot of the friends that I grew up with, their parents were working, and that was kind of not their plan, but it was more about, when you leave school, like if you don't want to go down the education route, it's fine to go and work, which is great, and it is fine. But I think obviously then sometimes that can impact the opportunities you get later in life and the kind of career that you take on. So actually having that option, having people just talk to them and say, no, it is possible, is sometimes the shake-up that people need.
Yeah, I mean, I think we very much rely on partnerships, so like Social Mobility Foundation, Sutton Trust, etc. And it might be that we have to, or professionals in the legal sector have to actually do the legwork to actually get in front of the young people in schools, etc. I do try and get into schools to talk about diversity, because the other thing is that what you got to remember is that a lot of people get messages from the media, from education, that they don't belong. Yeah, so you're trying to tell people that, yeah, we want diversity. They don't believe you, because their lived experience doesn't tell them that. If you're a person whose parents aren't born here, you're only British to an extent. Put a foot wrong, and next thing you know, you could be on a flight somewhere or left somewhere to languish in another country. Yeah, so all of those things kind of give people that message that they don't really want you. So it's like you have to go over and above to show people that there's stuff going on around, but we actually do want you. There's actually a value to you coming into our firm with your lived experience, with your perspective, with the way that you navigate the world. And I think often people struggle to articulate that. So if you want to take, I feel like I'm mansplaining here, but it's like if you take women as an example, yeah. So a woman has to think about risk in a totally different way than I do, right? So in terms from everything from the routine of going to the shop at night to like childbirth, those things could be fraught with risk. Yeah. So what that means is that a woman in the team is going to have a totally different perspective on levels of risk than a man would. So if you imagine you have a whole team of men looking at a situation, trying to assess the risk, their way of looking at it is going to be totally different to a woman. So if you have a mixed team now, that team is going to come to better decisions because they have the different perspectives. And if you want to add race into that, as a black person, you have to kind of really think in a different way, navigate the world in a different way, because that society wasn't designed with you in mind. So you have to think 3 or 4 steps ahead and think about how you present yourself, how people are interpreting your behavior in order to survive. So again, that means that you've got a cost, but you come in to these environments with a totally different way of thinking, which can benefit like any operational team. But I think people haven't actually grasped that concept in terms of the value. So they'll think of it in terms of, it'd be nice to have different people around the table, but essentially it's just easier to get what we've always done and get what we've always got. And if through doing that we can get different people, great. But what you actually need is interventions to subvert your processes, because your normal processes aren't bringing you the diversity and are not inclusive.
Literally.
So at different points, you look at what interventions can I do to ensure that people can thrive and get to levels of partnership, no matter what their characteristics are.
Amazing. No, and you're exactly, like I couldn't put it better myself, to be honest. And Michelle, just before we do a kind of a whip round of the key takeaways from this part and move on to the second session, what would you say is one of the main barriers to access in the legal sector?
Yeah, I think just building on what Reg has said, and I was talking to some of my Black colleagues about this. The biggest struggle they had getting into the legal sector was not really knowing anyone in the sector, not having any connections in the industry, which initially, it makes it feel really impossible to get a foothold. And that can really feel really disempowering and really demotivating. I think the financial implications as well, of course, often, certainly in the past, work experience programs and internships have often not been paid. And, young people from socioeconomically less advantaged backgrounds, often have jobs to fund their
Yeah.
tuition, living costs at uni. And so giving up that work to work for free is such an inhibitor. I think the other thing as well is I think imposter syndrome can really get in the way. And I don't want to use that term flippantly, and I know it gets a bit of bad press, but when I was reflecting on this question in relation to my own sort of experiences, I come from a working class background, and I've definitely moved into a middle class background now. But you know, when I was at university, I had such, severe self-doubt and kind of low self-esteem. And for me,
Yeah.
what happened is that I had no concept of a career. I didn't do a vocational degree, like law or medicine. And I worked in really low paid admin jobs for the first few years when I graduated from university. So this idea of kind of, not seeing people like me, not seeing role models who look and sound like me, that was quite a difficult notion for me to grasp, because I didn't even really know who I was. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure what my role models would have looked and sounded like. So we often hear, the importance of having role models, and that is absolutely true. It is really important, but I think there's another element to this as well that doesn't often get talked about, and it's the imposter syndrome. You need to kind of know who you are before you can start to feel some sort of connection and self-worth. And I think it's particularly difficult for LGBT plus people because there is such a stigma around sexual orientation, and there tends to be a lot of rejection from family, within
Yeah.
society, and so on. So there's a lot of kind of
Start to
self-doubt.
build that doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I
So
think
yeah,
networks. No, I was going to say
go on.
networks can play a big role in that, like creating that
Mm,
proximity. And I think some of the LGBTQ plus networks are doing like great work in terms of outreach. And also on this, with the intersectionality of it, I think because the LGBTQ plus is already like a coalition, I think there's a bit more understanding around, okay, we've got to advocate not just for people that have the same characteristic as us, but others within that group.
Yeah.
So I think, and I just was at the Stonewall conference last Friday, so it was great. There was a lot of love in the place there. And I think, you know, the networks can be really empowered to kind of
And
go out
allyship.
and and be allies, and also encourage, build a bridge as well. And I think, I feel like in terms of inclusivity, I think there's a lot more progress for sort of lesbian and gay people. I think maybe the other parts of the coalition, if you can call it that, there's probably more work to be done. But I think as we start to learn, and I think it's really important to talk about these things in schools, so people have that understanding, alongside things like Black history and people who have had achievements, who also have disabilities or neurodiverse conditions. And I think as we could get more used to understanding that all of these people, that everyone has and continues to make contributions to society and does have value, then it just becomes easy for people to feel like, yeah, I can be myself here. I can fit in. It's okay for me to talk about um, um, my same-sex marriage or adopting a child, things like that. And a lot more. The world's just a lot more compassionate if if we move in that vein.
No, 100%. And I think, do you know what? You make a really nice point there, and that kind of just ties it all back up with, anyone who is in that position of power, or not really even a position of power. Like, this is all our responsibility. And this is all for us to go out, to get involved, whether we can host a session in a school, whether we can, run a virtual session like this for an LGBTQ plus IA network. You know, whatever it may be, there are small actions that we can all take that then make a huge part to how people feel and how they relate, and also just that feeling of belonging. And I think, you know, even like people on this session, there might be some graduates, I believe, who are not necessarily working in the legal sector yet, but they're already coming onto the session and hearing from 3 people, all from different backgrounds, all from like working class, from being a black male, from being a working class mum as well, Hannah, and just, you know, seeing that it's possible, because it is, and that's the main thing. No, thank you. So I know I mean, I could talk about this all day because entry level is so important, but I will summarize things again at the end. Now, moving on slightly, when you're in the sector, there are a lot of people who say that it doesn't get necessarily easier, or there are still barriers and challenges to overcome, even when you've, got into the profession, you're now working within legal services or a law firm for a few years. So let's kind of talk a little bit about those before we come on to Q&A. Who wants to kick off? I'm going to open this up rather than pick a person.
I'll kick off if you like, Ebony.
Yeah, I would have picked you actually, but I didn't want to put you on the spot again.
Okay, no, because you did that already. Yes. Yeah. No, I wasn't necessarily going to lead with this, but I will. And Michelle picked up excellently about the imposter syndrome, and I was going to talk about imposter syndrome and confidence in relation to the last question, but I think it's really important here, and the whole mental health argument. So once you're already in the legal profession and you're thinking about, the longevity of your career, staying in it, progressing in it, going for promotions and things, there is certainly anecdotal evidence. I say I never like to make huge generalizations, but there's certainly anecdotal evidence that ethnic minorities, for example, suffer even more so with things like imposter syndrome and the mental health and things connected with that. And the same with neurodiverse. Autism and ADHD, you are more likely to suffer with anxiety and depression and things. So I think with these things, that then puts a cap on where people might reach in their career. And I think without an understanding of that and a support from the people within their firms that they're working for, there is still, there's huge stigma around many of the issues we're talking about, but there's huge stigma around even finding out whether you've got ADHD or autism. Do people even realize, there's many, as we hear, women in their 40s finding out. My husband's in his 50s when he was diagnosed with ADHD. It's only because my son was diagnosed that he thought, wow, there's so much I get that makes sense in my life now. And he's been a lawyer for 26 years. So, there are so many people who don't even know yet. And when they do they tell anyone? And again, that when the intersectionality comes into it, when you've got people of colour who are already hitting that ceiling within their firm potentially as it is, because they don't look like everyone else, they might not have as much confidence as others, because again, if you don't see it, you can't be it, as we've talked about. And then you throw in maybe neurodiversity or something like that, which means all of that pressure and stress is going to have an even greater impact on them. I think we just need so much more, as we're all trying to do, education and awareness around what each of these things mean and how we support people.
No, definitely. And I think you make a really good point actually about not necessarily realizing until later, or even people who might have grown up with a childhood that could be traumatic or could be considered traumatic, don't always realize that they have been suffering until later in life. And then actually, by taking the step back to learn, to grow as a person, to develop, that can then sometimes bring out, I wouldn't say issues, but it can bring things out about your personality that you didn't necessarily realize. So actually, by in some of these firms having, for example, the partner track, where you must sound a certain way, you must look a certain way, you must, and not necessarily physically look, but as in like you must look to be a certain type of person, working at a certain level and earning a certain amount of money or billings or whatever it may be in that partner model, as there are different models, which Hannah could tell you more about. But yeah, I think it's very much a point of, like it makes you feel even more like an imposter, or it makes you feel even more like you're trying to be something that you're not, which can be, I'd say one of the biggest barriers with the, when you're at war with yourself, how do you then put on your armor to like fight the world?
So I think it's
Essentially.
two things that I would like to say in response to that is you need to really invest in like culture change. Yeah. So I do sessions on microaggressions training. As people talk about microaggressions, they don't know how they kind of manifest itself. So I have this session where I have all the different scenarios about how people can experience microaggressions, and I get teams of people to look at that, like within operational teams, look at a situation and understand how that situation can result in a person feeling, and if you take a succession of them, what the outcome could be. Yeah, so people, like leaders especially, really need to be attuned to that. And the thing with microaggressions, what makes them so difficult is that they're quite subtle. They may even be quite benign when you're just asking someone a question like, where are you from? Where if you ask someone who's kind of assured of their position in society, it's not such a big ask. When you're asking someone who is their position is always questioned, like, are they supposed to be here? You ask them where they're from, it becomes problematic, right? So it's something from that to like things where people are comfortable with seeing you in a certain position when you're quite junior, and I think it's called the pet to threat phenomenon. And then they then become more senior and they get treated differently. People aren't comfortable because there's a hierarchy of humanity, right? So we kind of all instinctively know where everyone is. That's why certain people will get spoken to and treated in one way, and other people will get treated in a different way because of the hierarchy. And so when people seem to subvert the hierarchy and get higher than people make them they should be, that's when they experience different microaggressions. But we don't really kind of understand it. We just kind of know it happens, but we don't understand why it happens and how it plays out. So firstly, the education on that. And then the second bit is the proximity. So you have to find a way to build proximity and affinity between people, because we all tend to live our lives in silos. So, we're educated in generally with people from the same socioeconomic background as us. We tend to congregate with people who share our like ethnicity and interests and so on. So then the only time when you're gonna sort of break out of that mold is in the workplace, and that's an opportunity to kind of build that affinity, but not everyone chooses to do that. Yeah. So what you would need to do is even construct something. So like I'm thinking along the lines something like sponsorship, where you have a senior leader who is tasked with connecting with someone more junior and being like an advocate for their career. So sort of promoting them when they're not in the room, ensuring that they get stretch opportunities, profile raising opportunities that will give them the necessary experience and skills to be promoted. And
I think
that's
I was just going to say on that, like some people call it reverse mentoring as well. And I think it's so powerful because when I've spoken to CEOs, CROs, COOs who have taken part in reverse mentoring, the one interesting thing that it comes out is that they actually learn more, or they feel they learn more than the person who was in the mentoring. So that's
on that. So sponsorship is different to reverse mentoring. So reverse mentoring is kind of like mentoring upwards. So the person who's the reverse mentor may not necessarily get anything out of it. It's just like you're coming to talk to me and I'm basically making you more culturally aware. I'm just telling you this, that, and the other. Yeah. So the leaders actually benefiting, but the junior person who's doing the reverse mentoring, maybe not so much. Whereas sponsorship, you kind of maybe get the reverse mentoring by default by understanding someone who's not from the same background, doesn't share the same characteristics, but you're actually tasked with talking to them about their career and saying, right, what can I do to help you advance, right?
Okay.
And the thing
so
with
it's almost like that next step of that kind of mentorship both ways.
And the thing with that is that people will look at that and say, well, is that maybe advancing sort of a group that's seen as disenfranchised to the detriment of the majority group? And is that fair? And so my response is that often you need to take an equitable approach. So again, it comes to understanding the cost of difference, because sponsorship has always happened informally. So what will normally happen is that someone who is quite senior will then identify like a protege, someone in the organization who they identify with, either because they share characteristics, they've got things in common, and they will naturally build that relationship. And so you see people getting sponsored, but it's just not given an official term or formalized. Yeah. And because if you are different, you're less likely to be afforded the opportunity. You then have to create these interventions which will enable there to be equity. And that's all through the process, all through the employee life cycle, back to kind of schooling and education. You've got to understand the cost of difference and put in the interventions that will allow people to be genuinely equal, a level playing field. And then you can talk about meritocracy because everyone's starting from the same place.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And
if
Michelle,
I could just come in there, just to build on Reg's point, I think reverse mentoring is flawed in that case, because what you're sort of doing then is putting the burden of responsibility on the, let's take Black people in this instance, on them to educate, a white person, which I think is, as I said, problematic. So we want to build out a mentoring program at Capsticks, but for us it will be reciprocal mentoring, so that there's something in it for both parties. And so for the Black individuals, for instance, it will be that sponsorship that you speak to, Reg. They will get access to really senior partners within the firm who can talk to them about strategy, commercial awareness, all the things that you do at that kind of partner level, and help lift them up. So I think that's an important difference to make.
And do you know what? This is actually really interesting, because my definition or my understanding of reverse mentoring was that it was always that sort of two-way street, that they, mentored up, but actually the partner or the leader who they were mentoring would also provide them with, whether it's career or talking about goals or some kind of like, this is what a day in the life of a CEO looks like. So, if you want to get here, these are the things, and actually talk them through their job as well. And I always just, I don't know if that was an assumption or the way that when people
two-way mentoring. So yeah, two-way mentoring maybe. But I think with the sponsorship,
so I think it's
even sponsorship is different from mentoring. So a mentor is someone that you will talk through things with, like, what's going on with your day-to-day, your sort of work, and kind of a mentor will kind of help you work things out, right? Whereas a sponsor is someone that doesn't spend that much time sort of working through things with you. You go to a sponsor with your kind of career plan already set up, and then all it is, because they're very often very busy, it's just like, this is where I want to get to, this is my plan, can you help me get this kind of experience, or get in front of these people to ensure that that when I go for this promotion to associate or whatever it is, then I've got enough to be considered. And the sponsor's like, okay, cool, leave it with me. And then they've got the kind of political capital within the firm to be able to say, yeah, can we get Reg on this? Can we get Reg involved in this? Or yeah, I actually think Reg would be good in that. And then so it's more about speaking about you when you're not in the room, and gets you into those rooms.
And gets you into
so there's a quite a difference between sponsorship and mentoring.
Oh, interesting. No, fair. Well, I'm learning all that, as everyone else is. So we've talked a little bit about, imposter syndrome, reverse mentoring, sponsorship, involving people, creating groups. These are some of the things that you can do to kind of tackle some of the barriers for when someone's already in the business. Is there anything that you would all recommend to employees or professionals if they wanted to kickstart, and it shouldn't be on them. It should be like, I just want to stress this, it should be on the organizations and businesses to create a culture where people feel included, where people feel that they belong and that they are meant to be there. On the flip side, I do think there is an element of, no matter where you are, what level you are, proactivity. If you genuinely, you're determined to get to where you want to be, you should play a part in that as well. So is there any advice that you would recommend, apart from bringing your authentic self, to steal the title of Hannah's book? So apart from, bringing your authentic self, like, is there anything that you would recommend that people can actually do to kickstart this themselves?
I'll go very quickly first, Ebony, and then hand over again, because I was talking to somebody about this at an event this week they're at a firm who's got wonderful initiatives, different groups for all the different, all the different issues we've talked about today. And they just seem to be having quite a lot of success with it. So you're right, individuals can go off and start these, because, as we've said, communication is absolutely key. And as Reg just talked about, it's the education piece. It's talking to people, let them ask their questions, and that sort of thing. But what they were talking about is that it's all well and good having those groups, but you've got to have management buy-in. You've got to have not just the people in that group having the conversation. I've run women's groups for years, women lawyer support groups, and I love them. But we're reaching a point now where that's got to move on, because it's just the same people having the same conversation in that group without everybody else. Then we're not taking it further forward. So I know with this particular individual, they've got the managing partner involved, and I think so if you are going to start initiatives in your firm, which you absolutely should, if that's what you want to do, I would go and try and get that appointment with the managing partner. Let's go right to the top here and say, look, would you support this? And not just by like sending an email, but you've got to turn up. And you've got to turn up to those meetings and those support groups or committees or whatever they are, because if those senior leaders don't turn up, then it just doesn't have the gravitas, and it's just the same people having the conversations without it expanding to everybody else who actually needs to be there.
No, 100%. And Reg?
Yeah, so I was going to say, just on that, I think it's really helpful when you're dealing with senior people, especially senior men, is give them something to do, like a specific thing, right? So that's speaking as a man in that demographic. Yeah, I think we just tend to respond better when we're given something specific. So if you want us to just kind of turn up and show support, we can do that, but we'll kind of be a bit, okay, what am I doing here? It's International Women's Day. I'm a guy in the room, like, what am I supposed to do? But give us something specific, right? Turn up to do this, or need me shelves picked, I need this done, I need that done. We turn up, we come with our tools, right? Yeah. My chance to show I'm useful. And I think, that's why I was plugging sponsorship and things like that, because that's a specific task that you have to do that you're responsible for. And also, when you start putting into people's objectives, suddenly, like, as men, we can be a little bit tunnel visioned. So it's like, we want, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and it's a target, and it's like, okay, this is what I've got to focus on. When it's something that's seen as something a bit sort of ambiguous and over there, then it doesn't get the same focus. It's like, okay, I'm sure Jane will pick that up, and but yeah, so I think that works quite well in terms of getting the buy-in from senior men, I would say. And in terms of what we can all do, I think, in terms of like firms and organizations, I think it's just kind of, again, that cultural thing of changing. So one of the things I did when I was at Norton Rose Fulbright for my sins, is that we used to hire out space to charities, and the charities were all white. So you didn't think nothing of it, just all white charities. So I just assumed that it'd be okay to hire out space to black charities that I knew. So I was hiring out to 100 Black Men of London and different charities. And so you just see black people coming into the building, and they always looked a bit like that, like, oh, we're gonna get chucked out. But like, no, it's cool, you can come in.
I love, because I felt that. I felt that. So yeah.
Yeah, but I was doing it because it was a case of, like, people have to get used to seeing black people as guests in the building, like they can come in just like everyone else, and people have to see that. And so once people start seeing that, it starts to like make a change. So whatever you can do to show that, like, because if you don't do anything, the assumption is that it's white middle class. If you have a website and you're a corporate entity and you don't have any pictures, it's like, we're just going to assume it's white middle class and male at the top. But
Literally,
you need to have that visual diversity in representation, like digitally as well as in person, and then people can see, oh, things are changing around here. We're all allowed to come in.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, especially to the future people coming into the firm. Like, if you want a diverse workforce and you don't do these things, you won't get one. It's as simple as that. People genuinely feel that there's not a place for them if they can't see people who look like them or sound like them, whether it's from an accent point of view. And Michelle, just before we come on to, so we've got, I've been running slightly over, I'll be honest, but it's just been such a good conversation. But have you got anything to add before I open up to questions?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Thanks, Ebony. Just building on what Hannah was talking about around authenticity. I think people coming into the legal profession and when they're in the legal profession need to reflect on what it is that's unique about them that they can offer. And a really small example of this that happened recently, actually, obviously it's Ramadan has started today. So Ramadan Mubarak for anyone who is observing. And we have a paralegal who is Muslim in our advisory division. And she reached out to me and Martin, who's our managing partner, and said she'd really love to put on a presentation about Ramadan and Eid and give people the opportunity to submit anonymous questions in advance of that presentation on anything that they've ever wanted to ask or don't, necessarily understand about Ramadan. And she made the point that, yes, of course, you can go onto Google and learn about this stuff, but it's different when you have a colleague take time to share about their own personal experience. And so so she set that event up for the 11th of April, I think it is. And what is really interesting from my perspective as a kind of a trainer and a learning and development practitioner is we will all know from that session who Jemima is in terms of her kind of personal brand as a young paralegal coming up through the ranks, as it were. We'll remember that she took the initiative to put on this event. And I do truly believe as well that the reason she felt comfortable and able to do that is because we do have a genuine culture of inclusion at Capsticks. And that is role modeled from the very, very top as well. So I think fantastic, in terms of her leadership, personal brand, public speaking, it's ticking all of those boxes. And we all get to learn something from this. So I think, what is it that's unique about you that you can offer people, I think? And then the final thing I wanted to just add is I hear a lot of junior people say that they find networking a real challenge because, they're early on in their career. They don't feel like they have as much to say or as much to offer. But what I always encourage them to think about is the social value that they have to offer. It's not about offering, your credentials, your job title, your status, your academics, your wealth. People don't care about that stuff. And it's not to be flippant about the hard work and effort that you've put in, but what matters to people is how you make them feel, how curious you are about them. Do you take the time to listen? Do you make people laugh and smile? Are you empathetic? Are you compassionate? Those are the things that people will remember you for. And that's that kind of social value that we don't always necessarily get taught at school and at university.
No. And sometimes you even get told they're the soft skills. Don't mention them in an interview.
Human skills.
No. Relationship building, no matter what job you are doing, no matter where you are, whether you're in a law firm at the bottom, at the top, relationship building will be a key element in your role. So if you haven't got those skills, it makes them more difficult. So relationship building all the way. And I don't know if that's just because obviously it's a key element to my job, but no, 100%, Michelle. Thank you so much. All of you have raised some really incredible, insightful points, some key takeaways for everyone to walk away with. So I hope you all feel that you've walked away with one thing that you've learned today from this session. If you have, again, I'm just going to remind you all, I have put a comment in there, but please leave some feedback, leave me a comment. If you've enjoyed the session, let me know, what did you enjoy? If you'd like to see something different, or, you've got an idea for the next session, again, please leave a comment. It takes a minute. Now, before you rush off, we are going to open to Q&A. Like I said at the start, the panel members have kindly agreed to stay on for an extra sort of 10-15 minutes if needed. So I'm going to open up the floor, but has anyone got a question that can be directed to the panel? And one person will feel, more closely aligned to that question will answer, or it can actually be directed to someone specifically if you wanted to hear from one of them specifically. So please just either raise your hand or post a comment in the chat. No questions? Hey,
Hi.
Janet, thanks.
Oh. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say it's been a really, really good session, really informative. So I'm a careers consultant by trade. I've worked with young people for over 20 years. So it's actually quite depressing to hear this conversation over and over again, to be honest with you, because it's something that we are all trying to change effectively. The first point I wanted to make was just in terms of law firms, I just really plead with you all to be more organic in your ideas, and to kind of look beyond the obvious risk indicators in terms of free school meals or the first in your family to go to university, because I think those kind of indicators have moved on a little bit. Okay, lots more people are going to university. Maybe look at the age in which their parents have gone to university, for example, but just to kind of think out of the box in terms of your indicators, in terms of need. I think that's the first thing. And I think also in terms of in another life, I have actually worked with Reg as well. And it's just, and it's just about thinking.
Is there anyone Reg doesn't know?
It's about thinking out of the box, just in terms of, for example, why is there a lack of engagement with boys, for example? You know, is there a workshop that we could put in? Can we release some lawyers to come into the school and engage? So I just really plead to stop being so rigid in terms of just prime network focused and very robotic and very archaic in approach. So if there's any kind of innovative ideas that you've actually can kind of share as case studies, we'd like to hear that, actually. No pressure.
So what was the question again?
Share any examples of good practice.
Practice.
Yes. Or any kind of organic ideas that are on the horizon, or any that you've implemented in the past.
I heard something very interesting this week, Janet, from somebody I met, and he said that he'd previously worked at a large London Magic Circle type firm, and their requirements were quite strictly Oxbridge and 4As at A-level. And his point was, when we look at different demographics, not everybody will have gone to Oxbridge, and yet we're then limiting our pool. And so what he managed to get that firm to agree to was we would drop the Oxbridge, because they can prove their academic ability by the 4As. And actually, if they did come from a disadvantaged background where perhaps different levels of education with their parents, maybe they did have to work a part-time job as well studying, how much harder was it for them to get those 4As than for somebody else? So actually they're even higher. So I know there are firms having those conversations at the moment and looking at their entry-level requirements and being sensible really about them, so that they open it up. Textual recruitment, right? Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, innovation.
Amazing.
I would say like sort of work experience programs, secondments, anything that gives people a pipeline in somewhere where they wouldn't ordinarily be. So the last firm I was at, Trowers and Hamlin, they had a Routes to Work program, and because a lot of the housing, because a lot of clients were housing associations, they could come in and do work experience in the firm, and a lot of those sort of social housing residents wouldn't have really come into contact with us otherwise. And it wasn't just focused on young people, you could be at any age. And that's sometimes the thing people forget about social mobility. Like, you can become socially mobile at any age given an opportunity. Like, I didn't start working in the corporate world till I was like 40 plus. Yeah, but it's like, and there's lots of people who retrain maybe through the Open University, get a law degree, and because I haven't gone through the traditional route, the way's not open to them. But the value there, or the value that's being missed, is you've got some people that have had a whole lived experience of maybe starting a family early, or working in a totally different career or environment, and then they can bring all that into the legal field. But because the way we're set up is kind of geared towards graduates, then we're missing a whole swathe of people. So if we can adjust our processes that allow for people who kind of go other routes, other walks of life, that would be great. And I think there was another question about senior barristers and judges, which I just stopped.
Perfect. I was just about to come on to that, actually. Yeah. Sanae said, how do we reach the areas of the profession where there is no diversity? For example, senior barristers and judges.
Yeah, I was going to say some comments on that, because like basically people sort of flow into these jobs through tried and tested routes, and you get the same types of people. So you've got to look for somewhere where there be transferable skills. So I always talk about that I compare the private and the public sector. So in the public sector, like local authorities, you get a lot more diversity there because the public sector is more visible, and even the civil service, people know about the government departments and know about the local council because it's in their local community, so they can see themselves working there. Whereas a city is a very like selective area, and it's not everyone that's going to feel like they can go there. Which is, I mean, the thing that always astounds me is that I work with a lot of people that commute all the way from like home counties, and they come all the way through very diverse areas of like inner city or London, like where I've grown up and lived, and yet you don't get anyone from there. I'm like usually the only one from Canning Town, or the ends, as we might say. But it's a lot easier for me to get there. Like when there's a train strike, I can get in. But because of the assumption that certain folks don't belong, then someone who lives like miles out is going to feel okay to come in rather than someone on the doorstep. So you kind of, what you can do is now kind of have a secondment situation where someone who's working an equivalent role, maybe for a client or in the public sector, gets to be seconded over, and then you kind of let someone go over there and share that knowledge. It might be with a charity or something like that, and then that gives someone that exposure, and then they get the opportunity. I mean, maybe takes a few steps for them to become like a senior judge or something, but they have to start somewhere in that route in order to get there.
No, 100%. And actually, an interesting thing that I experienced when I was at law school was a session where we was taken to the Old Bailey, and we was just talking to a judge there, one of the female senior judges. And for me, that was quite interesting because we're going back to 2015. So even just seeing a woman judge was quite a rarity, especially at that senior level in one of the highest courts of the land. And I was just absolutely, I was like, wow, like, it's just amazing to hear her speak. And I think basically, and that was arranged by a firm that had come in and was helping out with our uni and kind of create this bridge. So basically, if you're part of a firm and you think that this is a good idea, there's nothing wrong with going out to these senior judges, asking them if they're willing to give up their time, because people are like these 3 amazing panel members who all agreed to come on to this session for me and give this time to you all. And I think just getting that arranged and just basically, keep hammering down those doors until you can arrange a little session, or getting a judge to go into a school perhaps and talk about becoming a senior judge and what it's like. Because I think people just don't necessarily feel that there is that representation until they see it. And when they do, they're kind of been more empowered by that. And then that obviously has a knock-on effect. So I know this is only small things and it's not going to take over the world, and it's not going to necessarily make all senior judges and barristers suddenly diverse and a fair representation, but slowly but surely we are getting there, and I think that's the main thing. Just having a look to see if there's any other questions. So there was a comment. It says leadership needs to change, need to drive the change. HR can only take it so far, and then it's down to the hiring promotion partner. They've not for the past decade, but now client procurement questions will start to drive D&I change in firms. So finally, in another 5 years, firms will look more balanced and reflective of society, especially in senior roles. They've said, I've not worked with Reg yet. We need to keep, so it looks like Reg might have some future work coming through. We need to keep at this, but are you changing partner mindsets if there's not a huge amount of fantastic content here to share with equity owners?
Yeah, I would just say yes, yes, and yes. And that's why, a lot of the firms I'm working with, we are insisting that we work at the senior equity partner level and that the managing partner is there. Because if you're going to try and change culture in any way, mine is mainly around the leadership and mental health and well-being side, but it's all about the culture. What culture does the firm want to have? Right, this is where we're going. But you've got to have the senior leaders having that conversation. Otherwise, yes, it's all great work, but is it really going to change anything inside that firm? Probably not, without everybody being involved.
to think, you know, maybe if there was a firm that wasn't being quite responsive to this, is, you know, could a petition help? Could maybe going to the CEO with a business case and sort of, you know, even having a chat with recruiters about how many people are leaving because the culture is not right, and then taking a business case to your CEO and saying, look at how many law firms are losing their best talent, and without that talent, what are we here for? So that might be an
If I
idea.
could just come in on that last point, and I'll keep it brief 'cause I'm conscious of time. One of the things we're doing to address this is that we're putting everyone in the firm who has hiring management responsibility on inclusive recruitment, inclusive interview training, because I think probably what happens is a lot of bias creeps in those interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and you know, diverse candidates will not get shortlisted because of that bias. Um,
And that
there's
bias can be
still,
unconscious as well. It's not
yeah,
necessarily a direct, like, I don't like you because you're brown or neurodiverse or whatever. It can be an
yeah.
unconscious bias that then plays an effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could be down to the simplest thing, like if someone doesn't make eye contact with you at the start of the interview, and then you have, you know, a negative perception of them for the whole rest of the interview, that has no bearing on their qualifications or their ability to do the job, but you've automatically kind of discounted them. And it's
Yeah.
getting people to just stop and pause and reflect on that. And we won't change everything immediately, but we do have a responsibility to try to do things a bit differently.
No, I think that's a really, do you know what? That's really, number one, lovely to hear, as a recruiter, not even just as a dig panel. Like, that is amazing to hear. You'll be surprised how many candidates I speak to who say, you know, the interview would have gone better if this person hadn't have said. And it could be one tiny thing. And then that makes them question whether they want to go for that whole job and that whole company because of one tiny comment made by someone on who might have been having a bad day, or who might have just not said something in the right way. So it's great that you're doing that training. And I think that is something that I personally would recommend to anyone here who's in that position, who's in HR. Look into this. Maybe even reach out to Michelle, ask her where the resources are that they're using. But that is a fantastic idea. Now, it looks like there's no more questions in the chat. So I'm just going to ask one last time before I let you all lovely people go with the rest of your Thursday afternoon. Has anyone got any final questions? I'm going to take that silence as a win and say no. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute, thank you, panel members. It's been a pleasure. Thank you everyone for attending. It's been amazing to see you. If you've not left a comment already, please do that now. Chat's still open. But I do want to hear your thoughts, and I guess if there's anything that I can do to make it better. But yeah, thank you, and I hope to see you all on the next Diversity Innovation Group event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.